Hi there BookTube, it's Eleanor here, and today I'm going to be talking about 3 non-fiction books that I've read recently. I've just been really on a bit of a non-fiction kick, and specifically sort of crime, but not wholly crime, but yeah, specifically that was what sort of tickled my fancy originally, and I was just speeding through them. So I've got 3 here today that I want to talk about. They were all 4-star reads, so all books that I really enjoyed and would definitely recommend if what they're about sort of tickles your fancy. The first one I want to talk about is The Trauma Cleaner by Sarah Krasnostein. I think it's Sarah Krasnostein, so apologies if I've said that wrong. And this one was a bit of a surprise for me, if I'm honest, and I don't know why, because so many people have reviewed this book, so I should really have understood a little bit more about what it's about. But it's really terrible, but if someone reviews a book that I know I'm going to be interested in, or I have on my shelf that I am sort of imminently going to read, I don't always listen too carefully to their reviews, because I don't want to spoil myself so much or taint the possibility of what I might think of something. Sorry, my doorbell went. So I think I was saying what I did know about this book is that it was about Sandra, and that she was transgender and also ran a trauma cleaning business. And that is really sort of what I went into this knowing. And I think if you go into this thinking that there's going to be a lot of details about murders and specifics about what happened, and that sort of case by case profile of a crime scene and the clearing up of it afterwards, then I think you'll probably be quite disappointed. But that's not to say that this isn't worth reading. I think it's interesting to note that what we do is we are following some of the customers that Sandra is going into, and these aren't all necessarily from crimes. Some of them are from people that are hoarders, or have mental health problems, or it could be from someone that's old that's just died of natural causes. So there's lots of reasons why she goes in, and we do follow some specific people that she is working for during the time that this is being written. But then we also in between these chapters go back and follow Sandra's life from when she was a young child and was Peter at that point, and we follow everything that she went through as a transgender woman in the 80s. There's so much that goes on. There's abusive family life early on in her life, there is prostitution, there is being transgender in the 80s and what that was like, there is relationships, there's all sorts of things that are covered in here, and I just thought it was really interesting. Sandra's an Australian woman, so again it's set in a place that I'm not so familiar with, so having that sort of perspective of what it was like in Australia in the 80s, especially for transgender people, was really interesting. And sort of just little things like not being able to be female on your passport or get married, and on all sorts of things which I think were really interesting to read about. So as I say, I did give this 4 stars. I think the one thing, and actually, I can't really mark it down for this specifically, but that's not to say that Sandra is a perfect woman. She's not perfect. There's things that she did in her life that I wouldn't condone and that I felt were morally wrong, no matter sort of what you're going through, to do with her children. But I'm not Sandra, and Sandra's life is not my life, and who am I to judge on someone else's decisions? So you have to try and read some things, I think, with a sense of perspective that it's okay that I don't agree with those things, and that if it was my life, I feel like I would do something differently, but it's not my life, and maybe I wouldn't have done things differently, and this is Sandra's story and not mine. So I really did enjoy this, and as I say, I gave it 4 stars. The next non-fiction I want to talk about is A False Report, A True Story, and this is by T. Christian Miller and Ken Armstrong. This story I thought was really interesting. It's obviously real life, it's non-fiction, non-fiction, and we're following a girl, and at the very start of the book she's 18 and she has gone to the police to say she was raped, and she's quite specific. You know, that she's woken up, this man is straddling her with a torch in her face, he's tied her up gently with these ribbons, he's posed her and taken photos, he's made her stand in the shower for 20 minutes afterwards so he can sort of make his escape, and she's very specific about what has happened. However, she's got a bit of an interesting backstory. She's been a foster child for years. She has a bit of a tumultuous history with her most recent foster mother, who she gets on really well with, but they just had some personality clashes along the way, and she's now living in sort of a facility that is to help people sort of move into real life and working and paying bills and living for herself, and she's not been there that long. And she goes in and she tells the police about her rape, and then they speak to different people in her life who, one of them implies that maybe she's a bit of a storyteller, maybe this isn't the complete truth, maybe it's something to do with attention-seeking behaviour that has sort of previously happened. And so the police decide to really put some pressure on her, and they really do put pressure on her to say that it's a lie and that she's made it up. And she eventually does say, she says it's a lie, she says that maybe she dreamt it. She tries to convince herself that maybe it wasn't real, maybe this didn't happen, maybe it was in her mind, maybe she was dreaming it, she'd had a late night, she was nervous about being somewhere on her own. And then the nail in the coffin is when the policeman tells her, because she then says a few days later, no, this did happen, I was raped. He says, if you now say that you were raped and we give you a polygraph test and you don't pass it, you will lose your housing and where you're living and your job. And so she says, okay, well, you know, she's terrified. She's 18, and so she says, okay, I did make it up. And she signs something to say that, and then they take her to court and they prosecute her for false reporting. So we have that bit at the beginning, and then we start to follow, so that was in sort of like 2008 I think, and in 2011, so a number of years later, a couple of years later, a rape occurs, and it's reported, and we start to then follow these rapes that are happening that all have a very similar MO but are in different places, and often different jurisdictions aren't sharing information, and so people don't realise that this is a repeat offender, and they're finding it hard to build up a picture. And we're just following the people that are on that case and who eventually do collaborate together and eventually do have this missing piece of the puzzle, which is our first girl who was raped. And I just think this book is really important. It baffles me the amount of rapes that go unreported and unprosecuted, or prosecuted and such lenient sentences given. And I just think reading this, it's no wonder that people don't want to come forward, don't want to put themselves through the trauma of having to repeatedly go over what's happened to them, and don't feel like feel like they're going to be judged because they're wearing a short skirt or they'd had a few drinks at the time. No one deserves to be raped or violated in that way, no matter what you're wearing or have drunk, and no one is asking for it. So I just think this is a really interesting book, and it really does highlight how people can be mistreated by the system, and that needs to change. This one I flew through. I think I read it in a day. I listened to it on audio. In fact, all of these I listened to on audio, which I really enjoyed the experience of. I listened on audio when I was sort of walking around, and then when I was at home I'd listen on audio and read along with it, which really helped. This one I sped through. In fact, I stayed up till about 2 in the morning, and it was a really, really strong 4 stars. And then the final book I want to talk to you about is actually the one I read before all of these, and that's I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. I'd heard about this book a lot. There was sort of quite a lot of buzz about it at one point, and everyone was reading it all at the same time. And I think that was at the point where a man was actually arrested as the Golden State Killer. And in fact, since reading this book, I've researched a bit more, and he is currently waiting. I think his trial begins in August, so I will be following that now, to follow along with it, I think, because I'm just really interested. Michelle McNamara is married, or was married. I'm afraid she died before this book was published, tragically, but she was married to Patton Oswalt, who is an actor, and she is was an investigative journalist, and became obsessed with this Golden State Killer case, and was researching it all the time, and started to write a book. And the book is documenting everything that she discovered, and sort of laying out these sort of known cases as they occurred, and following the patterns. And we have interspersed in there some pieces written by her research assistant, who actually finished the book in order to get it published. So the Golden State Killer was a serial killer, well, a serial rapist, and then rapist come murderer in the 70s and 80s in California. So a man broke into the houses of women, either while they were alone and raped them, or when they were with their husbands, and made the husbands watch. He often put sort of a saucer and teacup on the husband's back and said, if you move and make a noise, then I will kill you. And they had to lie there while their wives and partners were raped. Sometimes there was children in the room, which just makes me feel really horrified. And he continually evaded capture. There was just so many sightings and strange things that happened, but no one seemed to be able to capture this person. It was at a time where there wasn't that sort of DNA evidence, so they didn't have the ability to capture him. And then it wasn't until technology much later, well now, has got so much better, that they started to be able to use evidence that had been collected in order to get a better profile of who this might be. And so this book was written, and it wasn't until it wasn't long after this was published, I don't think, that they managed to capture someone looking at DNA evidence from cold cases. This book, I think, out of the three that I've mentioned, was a more complex read. There was an incredible amount of detail in here. There was so much detail, and I think the one thing that sort of jarred me a little bit to begin with was trying to piece together how it had been set out. I couldn't work out to begin with whether it was moving through sort of timelines chronologically, and I don't think it did. It sort of skipped around a little bit, which is what I struggled with a little bit, sort of getting into the sort of swing of the writing style. And it was certainly heavier on facts than the other two. Well, not heavier on facts, but it felt denser, and maybe because there was, more time has passed, more research has been done, more investigation has been done into these cases because of the longevity of before someone has been caught for them. But I really recommend it, and especially now it's very timely if you're interested in reading this, you've had it on your shelf. As I say, the person that has been arrested and is allegedly the Golden State Killer is going on trial in August, I think it is. So it's a very timely time to read it if you want to follow along with that case and see how the evidence came into play in real life, in real time. So yeah, I recommend this one as well. So 3 non-fiction books that I've read recently, 3 that I recommend, that I gave 4 stars to, and I'm still reading some non-fiction, and I'll just keep reading whatever I fancy and coming back to you and letting you know what I've been reading and letting you know my thoughts on them. So I hope you liked this, and I hope it might encourage some of you to finally pick up these books if you haven't already, if they pique your interest. Let me know if you do and how you find them and your thoughts on them as always, and let's chat in the comments down below. Bye for now, BookTube.